There's a silence inside you, a whisper that stirs when no one is watching. It asks, quietly but persistently, who are you when no one needs you to be anything? In a world that rewards performance, how do we know when we've lost our truth? This is a journey inward, to unmask the role and remember the soul. Most of us don't realize it, but we spend years rehearsing roles we didn't consciously choose. We perform, not on a stage, but in conversations, at work, on social media, even in front of the mirror, smiling when we ache, agreeing to be liked, succeeding to feel worthy, polishing ourselves until what's left feels hollow. The performance is subtle. It looks like being professional, positive, or put together. But beneath it, there's a quiet exhaustion, a spiritual hunger for something real. We become actors in our own lives, so practiced in our roles that we forget we're performing at all. The businessman who never admits uncertainty, the mother who never shows weakness, the friend who never has problems of their own, the partner who never expresses needs. Each performance, perfectly executed, slowly erasing the person underneath. If you've ever felt disconnected from your own joy, if you've ever looked at your life and wondered, who is this really for? If you've ever caught yourself in the mirror and felt like you were looking at a stranger wearing your face, this exploration is for you. Today, we're not here to judge the masks. They once protected you. We're here to gently notice them, to bring awareness to where performance ends and your authentic self begins. Inhale. Because beyond the applause and expectations, there is a deeper self, unrehearsed, unapologetic, unconditionally worthy. Let's begin. Daniel straightened his tie one last time before entering the conference room. As the company's go-to problem solver, he knew exactly what was expected of him. Smile, nod thoughtfully, offer solutions that made everyone feel heard. Be the reliable guy who never said no, never caused friction, never disappointed anyone. Daniel, thank you for staying late to help us sort this out, his manager said. And Daniel felt that familiar, warm flush of validation. He was needed. He was valuable. He was performing perfectly. 2 hours later, Daniel sat in his car in the empty parking lot, engine off, staring at his reflection in the rearview mirror. The meeting had gone well. Everyone had thanked him, yet something inside him felt absent, untouched, unseen. The streetlights cast long shadows across his face, and for a moment, he didn't recognize himself. When had his smile become so automatic? When had his voice taken on that perpetually helpful tone? When had he become this person who existed primarily in relation to others' needs? Have you ever left a room feeling like you weren't really there? You laughed at the right moments, you said the right things, and yet something inside you was quiet, unreached by all the interaction, unmoved by all the praise. This is not uncommon. Many of us were taught to adapt in order to survive, to be pleasing, to be useful, to be strong. But over time, the adaptation becomes the identity. The costume becomes the skin. The echo of your truth becomes faint, until one day you wonder, when did I stop being myself? Daniel had been wondering this for months without realizing it. It showed up in small moments of disconnection, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, agreeing with opinions he didn't share, accepting invitations to events he dreaded. Each time, a little voice inside him grew quieter until he could barely hear it at all. Daniel drove home that night with a question he'd never allowed himself to ask. If I'm so good at being what everyone needs, why do I feel so empty? The question followed him into his apartment, into his sleep, into his dreams.
It was the beginning of an awakening he didn't know he needed.
Living a performance doesn't always mean faking. It often means editing. Daniel knew this intimately, though he'd never named it before. When his phone buzzed with yet another request for help, his first instinct was always yes, even when his calendar was already crushing him. When colleagues asked his opinion, he'd scan their faces first, reading what they wanted to hear before he spoke. When friends invited him out, he'd show up with his customary cheerfulness, even on days when he felt like staying home and letting himself simply be. The performance had become so seamless that Daniel barely noticed the constant calculations. How much enthusiasm should he show? How much concern? How much agreement? His emotional responses had become algorithms, optimized for approval rather than authenticity. Here are the subtle signs that you, like Daniel, might be living a performance. You feel anxious when you're not on. There's an underlying terror of being caught without your mask, of someone seeing you unprepared, unpolished, simply human. Daniel experienced this every time someone knocked on his office door unexpectedly. His heart would race as he quickly assembled his helpful persona, afraid they might catch him in a moment of genuine tiredness or frustration. You seek validation before making personal choices. Your inner compass has been so long ignored that you've forgotten how to trust it. You find yourself asking others what they think you should do, even about deeply personal matters. Daniel realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd made a decision, even about what to eat for lunch, without considering what others would think of his choice. You change your tone depending who's in the room. With your boss, you're deferential. With subordinates, you're encouraging. With family, you're the responsible one. But who are you when no one is defining the role for you? Daniel had become a chameleon, so adaptable that he'd lost track of his original colors. You avoid expressing needs or boundaries, fearing rejection. The thought of saying, "I can't" or "I don't want to" feels dangerous, as if your worth depends entirely on your usefulness. Daniel had trained himself to anticipate others' needs before they even voiced them, preemptively offering solutions to problems they hadn't asked him to solve. Compliments feel good, but they don't land deeply. They bounce off the surface of your performance rather than reaching the person underneath. When people praised Daniel's reliability, he felt a strange hollowness, as if they were complimenting a costume he wore rather than who he truly was. You may even feel like an imposter in your own life. Daniel often felt this way, especially when people praised his reliability and kindness. Part of him wanted to say, "But you don't know how tired I am. You don't know how much I want to disappoint you just once." You experience what psychologists call emotional labor fatigue. The constant monitoring and managing of your emotional expression becomes exhausting. Daniel would come home from social gatherings feeling drained, not because the events were difficult, but because maintaining his performance required enormous energy. You've lost touch with your own preferences. When asked what you want, what movie to watch, where to go for dinner, how to spend your free time, you genuinely don't know. Daniel realized with shock that he couldn't remember the last time he'd chosen something purely because he wanted it, not because it would please someone else or fit his image. You feel responsible for other people's emotions. If someone seems upset, you immediately assume it's your job to fix it. If someone is uncomfortable, you change your behavior to accommodate them. Daniel had become so attuned to others' emotional states that he'd forgotten how to simply be present with his own. It's not that you're lying, it's that you've been living half-truths, curated truths, socially acceptable truths. But your soul, it remembers who you were before the performance began, and it's quietly waiting for you to notice.
What Daniel was experiencing has a name, a framework that helps us understand the exhausting theater of modern life. Sociologist Irving Goffman described human interaction through the lens of dramaturgy, the idea that we are all performers on the stage of social life. Goffman distinguished between our front stage behavior, the polished, socially appropriate performance we give when others are watching, and our backstage reality, where we can drop the act and simply exist. Daniel's front stage was immaculate, the helpful colleague, the reliable friend. the man who never let anyone down. But his backstage was a place of exhaustion and questioning, a space where he could finally admit that the performance was wearing him thin. This connects to what researchers call emotional labor, the exhausting work of managing our true feelings to present socially acceptable emotions. Sociologist Arlie Hochschild first identified this concept when studying flight attendants who were required to maintain pleasant demeanor regardless of how passengers treated them. Daniel was a master of emotional labor, constantly monitoring and adjusting his responses to meet others' needs while ignoring his own emotional reality. This isn't just tiring, it's a form of disconnection from the self that can leave us feeling hollow and lost. The psychological term for what happens when our actions don't align with our authentic self is cognitive dissonance, the mental stress that arises from holding contradictory beliefs or values. For Daniel, the dissonance was between his deep need for authenticity and his compulsive people-pleasing. This internal conflict was the source of his exhaustion, the reason why success in his performance never translated to genuine fulfillment. But there's another layer to this, what psychologists call false self-compliance. Developed by psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott, this concept describes how we sometimes develop a false self to meet others' expectations, while our true self remains hidden and undeveloped. The false self can be quite successful in the world. Daniel's certainly was, but it leads to a persistent feeling of emptiness and disconnection. Understanding these concepts doesn't immediately solve the problem, but it does something crucial. It normalizes the experience. You're not broken for feeling this way. You're human, navigating the complex demands of social life with strategies that once served you, but may no longer fit who you're becoming. The mask served a purpose. For Daniel, it began in childhood. His parents divorced when he was 8, and somehow his young mind concluded that if he was just good enough, helpful enough, if he never caused problems or expressed needs, maybe he could hold everything together. Maybe he could be the solution instead of another complication. "You're such a good boy, Daniel," adults would say, and he learned that his worth was tied to his agreeableness. When his mother was stressed, he became the perfect child. When his father remarried, he became the son who never caused friction with the new stepfamily. The mask wasn't chosen consciously. It was crafted in the crucible of a child's desperate need to belong and be loved. Children are remarkably intuitive about the emotional climate around them. Daniel learned to read the subtle signs: his mother's forced smile when she was overwhelmed, his father's tension when discussing custody arrangements, his stepmother's careful politeness that masked discomfort. He became a translator of unspoken needs, a mediator of unexpressed conflicts, a solution to problems no child should have to solve. The tragedy is not that he developed this skill. It was a form of genius, really, this ability to attune so precisely to others' needs. The tragedy is that in becoming so skilled at reading others, he lost the ability to read himself. Perhaps your mask has a different origin story. Maybe as a child, being your full self was unsafe. Your sensitivity was too much. Your dreams were unrealistic. Your anger was disrespectful. Your joy was too loud. Your sadness was dramatic. Your curiosity was annoying. Your independence was selfish. So you adapted. You became what others could accept, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. It was a form of protection, a brilliant way to belong. Children are remarkably adaptable. They will sacrifice pieces of themselves to maintain connection with their caregivers, because for a child, disconnection feels like death. But belonging at the cost of authenticity is not belonging at all. It's a spiritual exile. It's being loved for who you pretend to be, while the real you remains hidden, unwitnessed, slowly starving for recognition. The masks we develop in childhood often become more elaborate in adulthood. Daniel's helpful child grew into the indispensable employee, the perfect friend, the son who never caused worry. Each role he played was a variation on the same theme. I am valuable because I am useful. I am lovable because I am agreeable. I exist because I serve.
These patterns are reinforced by a culture that often rewards performance over presence. We live in a world that celebrates the highlight reel, the success story, the person who has it all together. Social media amplifies this, creating endless opportunities to curate our image, to present the best version of ourselves while hiding the messy, complicated, beautifully human reality underneath. Daniel's moment of awareness came, as these moments often do, through a simple question from an unexpected source. He was having coffee with Maya, a colleague who had become a friend over the years. She was sharing something difficult about her relationship, being vulnerable in a way that Daniel admired, but never allowed himself. "Thanks for listening," she said when she finished. "You're always so good at being there for people. But how are you really doing, Daniel?" The question caught him off guard. Not "how's work" or "how was your weekend?" but "how are you?" As if she sensed there was a person behind the helpful exterior, someone who might have his own struggles and needs. For a moment, Daniel's automatic response system failed him. He opened his mouth to say, "I'm fine," or "I'm great, thanks for asking," but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he found himself looking at Maya with an expression of surprise, as if she'd asked him to solve a complex mathematical equation. He started, then stopped. "I don't know how to answer that." Maya's face softened with understanding. "When was the last time someone asked you that question?" Daniel thought about it, really thought about it. People asked him how things were going, how work was, how his weekend was, but when was the last time someone had asked him about him? Not his circumstances, not his achievements, not his usefulness, but him. He couldn't remember. For the first time in years, Daniel felt seen. Not for what he did, but for who he might be underneath it all. And in that moment of being truly seen, the mask began to feel less like protection and more like a prison. The moment you begin to realize this, the mask begins to loosen. Not because you fight it, but because you see it for what it is, an old survival pattern, not your truth.
So how do you stop performing? Daniel discovered that the answer wasn't as dramatic as he'd feared. You don't need to fix anything. You simply begin to notice. Notice the moment you laugh when you want to cry. Notice when your yes feels heavy. Notice when you shrink to make others comfortable. Daniel started small. He began paying attention to the feeling in his stomach when his phone rang with another request. That tight, slightly nauseous sensation that he'd been ignoring for years. He finally let himself feel it fully. The practice of noticing became Daniel's first act of rebellion against the performance. For years, he had been so focused on managing his external presentation that he had lost touch with his internal experience. Now, he began to cultivate what therapists call interoceptive awareness, the ability to sense what was happening inside his body. He noticed that his shoulders tensed when he received certain emails. He noticed that his breathing became shallow when he was about to say yes to something he didn't want to do. He noticed that his jaw clenched when he was suppressing frustration. His body, it turned out, had been trying to tell him the truth all along. Then, pause. This became Daniel's new practice. Before automatically saying yes, before jumping into problem-solving mode, before performing his usual role, pause. Ask yourself, what am I really feeling? What would I say if I trusted I'd still be loved? What truth have I been hiding from myself? The answers came clearly. I'm feeling resentful that my personal time is always considered optional. If I trusted I'd still be loved, I would say that my weekend plans matter too. The truth I've been hiding is that I don't want to be the person who's always available for everyone else's emergencies. He called Danielle as soon as the stress was over, and he wanted to ditch. He had made plans with his sister that weekend, but he always put Danielle first. He felt captured by her, held hostage by her cam emergencies. And this time, Danielle wanted him to help her move apartments. When she called, he was so filled with annoyance that he tried an authenticity experiment. He asked if he could think about it and call her back. She wasn't encouraged, but agreed. He breathed and asked himself the questions. What am I feeling? What would I say if I trusted I'd still be loved? What truth have I been hiding?
The answers came clearly. I'm feeling resentful that my personal time is always considered optional. If I trusted I'd still be loved, I would say that my weekend plans matter too. The truth I've been hiding is that I don't want to be the person who's always available for everyone else's emergencies. He said, I understand this feels urgent, but I've committed to spending time with family this weekend. Could we look at the timeline and see if there's another way to approach this? His manager looked surprised. This wasn't the Danielle she was used to, but she didn't fire him. She didn't even seem angry. Instead, she said, of course, thanks for being honest about your bandwidth. The world didn't end. The sky didn't fall. Danielle realized that many of his fears about authenticity were based on childhood experiences that no longer applied to his adult life. He was no longer a powerless child who needed to earn love through compliance. He was an adult with value beyond his usefulness, even if he was just beginning to believe it himself. Begin practicing authenticity in small doses. Share something real with someone safe. Say no when you mean it, even if your voice shakes. Create space to be with yourself, unfiltered. Let yourself have preferences. Let yourself have bad days. Let yourself need things. Danielle started a practice he called authenticity experiments. Each day, he would try one small act of genuineness. He would express a real preference instead of defaulting to whatever you want. He would share a struggle instead of only offering solutions. He would admit when he didn't know something instead of pretending he did. These experiments taught him something profound. Authenticity is not a destination, but a practice. It's not about becoming a different person, but about becoming more fully yourself. It's not about perfection, but about presence. And above all, forgive the version of you that had to perform. That version loved you enough to keep you safe. Danielle learned to speak to his people-pleasing self with compassion. Thank you for protecting me when I needed it. You did such a good job, but I'm safe now. I can handle being disliked by some people. I can handle not being everyone's solution. This self-compassion was perhaps the most crucial part of Danielle's transformation. For years, he had been critical of his people-pleasing tendencies, seeing them as weakness or cowardice. But when he looked at them through the lens of compassion, he could see them for what they really were: a child's brilliant adaptation to difficult circumstances. The part of him that performed had been trying to ensure his survival and belonging. It had done its job well, perhaps too well. Now it was time to thank that part and gently let it know that the emergency was over. But now you are safe enough to be real.
There is a version of you untouched by expectation, unburdened by applause. This version doesn't seek to impress. It seeks to express. It loves not to earn, but to connect. It exists not to be seen, but to be whole. Daniel began to discover this version of himself gradually. It emerged in small moments, declining a social invitation because he genuinely wanted to stay home, sharing a worry with a friend instead of only listening to theirs, expressing an unpopular opinion in a meeting, admitting when he didn't know something instead of pretending he did. Each act of authenticity was like flexing a muscle he'd forgotten he had. At first, it felt awkward, uncertain, but gradually it began to feel natural, even liberating. Daniel realized that he had been carrying an enormous weight without realizing it, the weight of constant self-monitoring, of perpetual performance, of living in fear of his own truth. When you begin to live from this space, people may notice a change. Some will resist. They liked the performance. They were comfortable with the version of you that never made waves, never had needs, never said no. Some of Daniel's colleagues seemed confused by his new boundaries. A few friends seemed almost offended when he started being honest about his feelings, instead of just being endlessly supportive. This resistance, Daniel learned, was information. It told him which relationships were based on his usefulness rather than his personhood. It revealed which connections were authentic and which were transactional. This knowledge was painful but necessary. Some will celebrate. They've been waiting for your truth. Maya was one of these. "I feel like I'm finally meeting you," she told Daniel after he shared his struggle with people-pleasing. "I always sensed there was more to you than the helpful guy persona." Others surprised him. His manager, whom he'd feared would be disappointed by his new boundaries,
actually seemed more engaged with him. "I appreciate your honesty," she said, after another conversation where Daniel had expressed his actual capacity rather than his theoretical availability. "It helps me plan better when I know what's realistic. But what matters most is that you feel seen by yourself." Daniel realized that he had been a stranger to himself for so long that discovering his authentic preferences felt like meeting someone new. He liked quiet mornings more than busy evenings. He preferred deep conversations to small talk. He was actually quite funny when he wasn't worried about offending anyone. He had strong opinions about things he'd never allowed himself to voice. He discovered that he was naturally introspective, something he'd always seen as a flaw in a world that seemed to reward extroversion. He found that he was drawn to complexity, to nuance, to the spaces between black and white thinking. He realized that his sensitivity, which he'd always tried to hide, was actually one of his gifts. It allowed him to connect with others in ways that surface-level interactions never could.
This brings us back to Kurt Vonnegut's warning, "We are what we pretend to be." So we must be careful about what we pretend to be. Daniel had spent years pretending to be the perfect, helpful guy, and he had indeed become that, at the cost of his authentic self. But here's the profound twist that Vonnegut's insight offers us. If we are what we pretend to be, then we can use this principle consciously. Instead of pretending to be what others need us to be, we can begin pretending to be who we truly are. We can act as if our needs matter. We can behave as if our voice is valid. We can pretend that we deserve love just for existing, not for what we provide. Daniel started this practice in small ways. He would act as if he was someone whose time was valuable, whose opinions mattered, whose feelings were worth expressing. At first, it felt like another performance. But this time, he was performing his authenticity rather than his adaptability. And slowly, remarkably, this conscious pretending began to reshape his reality. The more he acted as if he mattered, the more he began to believe it. The more he behaved as if his authentic self was acceptable, the more natural it became to simply be himself. This is what psychologists call behavioral activation. The idea that we can sometimes think our way into new feelings by first acting our way into new behaviors. Daniel was essentially rewiring his neural pathways, creating new patterns of thought and behavior that aligned with his authentic self rather than his performed self. When you stop performing, you don't become less, you become more grounded, more magnetic, more you. Daniel discovered that people were actually drawn to his authenticity in ways they never were to his performance. His genuine presence was more compelling than his polite chuckling had ever been. His honest struggles made him more relatable than his put-together facade had ever been. There's a psychological principle at work here. We connect with people through their humanity, not their perfection. When Daniel allowed himself to be imperfect, uncertain, occasionally grumpy or tired, he gave others permission to be human too. His authenticity didn't push people away, it drew them closer. He also discovered something that surprised him. Being authentic required less energy than performing had. The constant self-monitoring, the perpetual calculation of how to respond, the emotional labor of managing his image, all of this had been exhausting. Authenticity, while sometimes uncomfortable, was ultimately more sustainable. 6 months after his conversation with Maya, Daniel found himself in another coffee shop, this time listening to a young colleague who was clearly struggling with the same people-pleasing patterns Daniel knew so well. "I just feel so exhausted," the young man said. "I'm always helping everyone else, but I feel empty inside." The old Daniel would have offered solutions, tips, encouragement, all from his head. The new Daniel did something different. He looked at this young man with recognition and said, "I know that exhaustion. I've been there. It's the loneliness of being loved for what you do rather than who you are." The young man's eyes filled with tears. "Yes," he whispered, "that's exactly it." In that moment, Daniel realized that his authenticity wasn't just healing for him, it was permission for others to be real too. By dropping his mask, he had created space for someone else to do the same. This was the true power of being, not the ability to solve everyone's problems,
but the courage to be human alongside them. This is how authenticity spreads, not through preaching or advice giving, but through example. When we give ourselves permission to be real, we give others permission to be real too. When we show up as ourselves, we invite others to do the same. When we stop performing, we create space for genuine connection. Daniel began to notice this ripple effect in other areas of his life. His relationship with his parents shifted as he stopped trying to be the perfect son and started being the real one. His friendships deepened as he allowed himself to be vulnerable. Even his work relationships became more satisfying as he brought more of himself to his professional interactions. And that, beloved, is freedom.
Before we reach our ending, it's important to understand that the journey from performance to authenticity is not a simple progression from bad to good. The capacity to adapt, to read social cues, to present different aspects of ourselves in different contexts, these are not character flaws. They are sophisticated human skills that serve important functions. The problem is not that we have masks. The problem is when we forget that we're wearing them, when the mask becomes so fused with our identity that we lose touch with the face underneath. Daniel's story is not just about individual healing. It's about a broader human experience. In our interconnected world, we all navigate multiple contexts, multiple relationships, multiple versions of ourselves. The mother who is also a professional, the leader who is also a learner, the strong person who is also vulnerable. The goal is not to eliminate all adaptation or social awareness. The goal is to develop what psychologists call differentiation, the ability to maintain a sense of self while being in relationship with others. It's the capacity to adapt without losing yourself, to be flexible without being false. The wisdom of gradual emergence. Daniel's transformation didn't happen overnight, and neither will yours. Authenticity is not a switch that gets flipped, but a skill that gets developed. It requires patience, practice, and above all, compassion for the parts of yourself that learned to hide. There will be moments when you revert to old patterns. There will be situations where the mask feels safer than the face underneath. There will be relationships where authenticity feels too risky, at least for now. This is not failure. This is wisdom. Sometimes the mask is still the right choice. The difference is that now it's a conscious choice rather than an unconscious compulsion. Daniel learned to see his people-pleasing not as something to be eliminated, but as a tool to be used consciously. There were still times when being helpful and agreeable served both him and others. The difference was that now he could choose when to be helpful, rather than being compulsively helpful. He could be agreeable when it aligned with his values, rather than being agreeable to avoid conflict. The courage of imperfection. Perhaps the most radical act in our performance-oriented culture is the willingness to be imperfect, to show up as works in progress rather than finished products, to admit uncertainty, to express needs, to have bad days, to be gloriously, messily human. Daniel's greatest breakthrough came not when he learned to say no, but when he learned to say, I don't know. For someone who had built his identity around being helpful and knowledgeable, admitting ignorance felt terrifying, but it was also liberating. It freed him from the exhausting pressure of always having answers and allowed him to experience the joy of genuine curiosity and learning. This willingness to be imperfect created space for others to be imperfect too. His team meetings became more collaborative when he started admitting when he was uncertain. His friendships deepened when he shared his struggles alongside his successes. His relationship with his family became more genuine when he stopped trying to be the son who never caused worry.
So pause the performance, step off the stage, and come home to your soul. It's quieter here, but it's real. Daniel sits in his apartment on a Sunday morning. No agenda, no one to please, no role to play. For the first time in years, he feels himself. Not the helpful version, not the agreeable version, not the reliable version. Just Daniel. Tired sometimes, joyful sometimes, uncertain sometimes, human always. The morning light filters through his window, casting gentle shadows across the room. He doesn't rush to check his phone or plan his day or consider what others might need from him. Instead, he simply sits with himself, present to whatever arises. This simple act,
being alone with himself without needing to be anything for anyone still feels revolutionary. And the you that exists in this stillness, they are enough. Not because of who they pretend to be, but because of who they are. The mask is optional now. You can choose when to wear it and when to set it down, but you never again have to forget who you are underneath it all. Some days you might still find yourself slipping into old patterns. You might catch yourself performing when you meant to be present, pleasing when you meant to be authentic. When this happens, don't judge yourself. Simply notice. Thank the part of you that's trying to keep you safe, and gently return to the truth of who you are. Remember Daniel in that coffee shop creating space for someone else's authenticity through his own. Remember that your willingness to be real doesn't just heal you, it gives others permission to heal too. Your authenticity is not just a personal journey, it's a gift to the world. In a culture that often rewards performance over presence, choosing authenticity is a radical act. It's a declaration that you are more than your usefulness, deeper than your achievements, worth more than your ability to make others comfortable. Welcome home. The journey from mask to soul is not a destination, but a practice. It's the ongoing choice to show up as yourself, to trust your experience, to honor your truth. It's the courage to be seen, to be known, to be loved for who you are rather than who you pretend to be. And in this homecoming to yourself, you discover something beautiful. The person you've been looking for, the one worthy of love and belonging, the one with something unique to offer the world. That person has been there all along, waiting patiently beneath the performance, ready to emerge whenever you're ready to let them. The stage is yours, but now you know. You never needed to perform to be worthy of the spotlight. You were always enough, just as you are.
If this stirred something within you, there is a reason you listened this far. Beneath the noise of daily performance, your soul recognized something familiar. The quiet ache of living half-truths, the exhaustion of being everyone's solution, but no one's authentic self. This is just the beginning. We explore these depths regularly, the spaces between who you are and who you've learned to be, the tender territories where masks meet soul, the sacred work of coming home to yourself. Subscribe to join us in this ongoing journey inward. Each exploration is an invitation to pause the performance, to listen to the whisper that knows your name. Because in a world that rewards facades, choosing truth is the most radical act of self-love. Your authentic self has been waiting patiently in the silence. Are you ready to meet them? Hit subscribe. Your soul will thank you.